Welcome to the Around the Block podcast presented by PrepVolleyball.com. We're your hosts, Jimmy Pompeo and Sam Heyman, here to give you the inside scoop on all things prep. Welcome back to Around the Block with Jimmy and Sam. Today's episode is a goodbye to the NLI.
Ooh.
So we're going to be talking about the end of the National Letter of Intent and what the potential future looks like for student athletes and college commits moving forward. But first, let's get through our housekeeping segment. We've got some great articles coming out. State champion salutes are going to be rolling. We've got more trending team articles bouncing from region to region. A bunch of milestones for high school athletes, 1,000 kills, 1,000 digs, some really impressive numbers. We've got our national rankings that come out every week, and we have a new segment, a new feature, the Recruit Pursuit. So we're going to be kind of breaking down tips and steps for players who want to be recruited, who want to play at the next level. So that's all coming down the pipeline. Be ready for that. And as usual, use promo code podcast for 25% off a new subscription to Prep Volleyball. So my X-File segment this week, Sam, is actually more for you. It's called Karch on the March.
Oh, he gone.
Yeah,
not going too far though.
We kind of talked about this a little bit on the last podcast, but what's going on with Big Karch?
Well, Coach Karai is going to be accepting a new role within USA Volleyball. He'll be moving over from the women's senior national coach to the men's senior national coach. And the press release from USA Volleyball did make it sound like he was going to be kind of cohabitating coaching space with John Speraw, the newly elected president and CEO of USA Volleyball. What capacity that's going to look like, we're not sure as we enter a new quad for Olympic qualifying and FIVB World Championships and NBL and all of the competition series that go on for the Olympic qualification process. But it'll be adding another chapter to a storied career for Karch, who has won everywhere he's been and has been an extremely prominent figure in the volleyball community for the last number of decades. From his extremely successful career at UCLA to his professional career, notably on the AVP circuit in the sand throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. And then during his time as a coach with certainly most notably with the USA women's senior team. So congratulations to both Karch Karai and John Speraw for their new posts with USA Volleyball. And if I'm not mistaken, I did just see an article the other day that said that April Ross would be retiring from competition. So one of the legends of the Team USA beach scene is hanging him up. So that could just be from international competition. I didn't really read it too closely, but either way, we've got some big news on some of the game's big names. So as far as Coach Karai is concerned, I think we're still pretty happy that he'll be in the Team USA system. And it'll be interesting to see what he can do with the men's program that's coming off of a bronze medal they won bronze, right? In the Olympics?
The men's? Yeah.
Yeah, they won bronze.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what, yeah.
Yeah, we just did trivia on this. You know what? It was here and now it's gone.
We did more of the women's stuff though. So he'll be taking over a program that has a lot of really solid talent in it, and it seems like more's coming down the pipeline. So we're excited to see what Coach Karai can do on the men's side of the ball, back on the men's side of the ball, I suppose. So very exciting to see all of that.
Yeah, speaking of the men's side of the ball, it's time for Sam's Adventures in Adult Volleyball. Give me that recap. Recap your weekly performance in adult volleyball.
Week one, this is, and I'm sure I've said it before, and I know we've talked about it, but to all of the current student athletes out there, please enjoy your time as collegiate student athletes or high school student athlete, or whatever capacity you have the opportunity to enjoy the game of volleyball that's being curated for you. Whether it's high school, club, if you're in college, if it's club college, whatever it is, you're in a time of your life where you're getting to enjoy the game, and it's largely being organized and taken care of for you. That changes pretty drastically after you graduate, unless you're going to continue to play professionally in some capacity. So this was week 1. I'm in a men's indoor quads league, which is a little bit different. It's a lot of fun, I will say. I met my 3 teammates for the first time about 10 minutes before we started playing.
Wow.
Yeah. So, getting off to a start where you're still trying to remember the person's name who just said it to you, and it just boop, in one ear and out the. It's terrible. There's nothing in there to catch the information. It's just, oh, hey, that's your name. But it was so we're playing 2 matches a night. It's once a week. And our first 2 matches were really good. We won 2-0, 2-0 in both of our matches.
Busting out the broom, baby.
Yep, they've got your boy over on the right side, which is simply questionable, but we make it work. I never thought of myself as a big right side, but boy, oh boy, here we are. So we've got 2 fellas from Wisconsin that are new to the area that are kind of, a 1-2 tandem. And then actually in another case of small worldism, we a fella from the Lancaster, Pennsylvania area who is very familiar with the area. One of my best friends in the world lives with his family over in that area, and he's been there for a long time. And we went to St. Francis together, and we in our conversations mentioned some of the playing experience that I had being at St. Francis. He's like, "Oh, when were you there?" Because I had so many friends from high school that ended up going there, and some played volleyball and this and that. So I'm older than he is, so there was not much crossover with that. But it's neither here nor there. So we're 2-0, 2-0, 4-0 on the season. And I think we played one of the tougher teams that's in our league or our session. So good statement win. Everything's still attached. The shoulder's still moving okay. The knees haven't imploded, and the ankles are doing all right.
That's what we like to hear.
It's going to be touch and go as we move through the season here. But I'm looking forward to making more connections and hopefully finding more opportunities to play and continue to be competitive. But boy, oh boy, enjoy your time where you are, kids, because it gets challenging to do these things and make it happen. But I'm happy to be able to keep playing and stay active. So very blessed.
Very good. That was Sam's Adventures in Adult Volleyball. Tune in next week where we see how he did and whether his body is still in one piece.
It's questionable. Oh boy. All right.
Let's get it. Let's
to
get
the
into
meat
it.
and potatoes. To the meat and potatoes of today's show, because you're going to hear us say we don't know a lot today, and you're going to hear us say we can only assume we can get, because this topic that we're going to be chatting about today is an ongoing, ever evolving, amorphous sort of I wouldn't even call it a homogenization. It's just a real big mess. It's a big mess of things that we are going to tackle and jump into today. When we touched on it in a previous show, when we discussed that the NCAA will be moving away from the national letter of intent signing process and how, effectively changing how student athletes bind themselves to institutions and make agreements with the institutions of their choice to compete. And then, along with the recent House settlements against the NCAA and recent rulings and judgments, to be paid for their, or I shouldn't say paid, compensated for their efforts within those programs. So since the beginning of the month and we had the announcement, we have had a few clarifications on some of the details that will be coming down the pipeline. Jim, do you want to jump into some of the things that you wanted to talk about on the front end of that, and we can kind of keep things rolling?
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to give some like very general kind of bullet points for folks who may not know a lot about this. Like for instance, there are people out there that don't know what the NLI is, the National Letter of Intent. So that was a legally binding contract between a student athlete and a college that indicated the student's commitment to play sports at that college, which is no more. However, Division II will still be utilizing the NLI throughout its commitment process. So this really only applies to Division I moving forward. So in Division I sports, colleges will now, and I believe this is what the process is going to be, colleges will now create their own agreements that include financial aid and NIL terms, which is name, image, likeness. That this should prevent athletes from speaking to other schools when they sign this agreement directly with the college. And according to the NCAA Division I Council, they explained that incorporating the benefits of the NLI program into institutional aid agreements is intended to add clarity and efficiency to the commitment process for all prospective student athletes, including four-year college prospective student athletes. So, yeah. However, nothing will be binding until they begin their first semester. So that's like the main gist of what it was versus what it will be. And then when that agreement is signed, the college will have to honor that scholarship offer or financial aid offer unless there's a specified condition in the contract. So if there's something in the contract that they sign that they void that contract by doing that, that contract is null and void. The basic framework of preventing multiple aid agreements and stopping recruitment and after a commit remains unchanged is the goal of these contracts. So basically, you're going to be signing with a school, you're signing some kind of financial agreement directly with that school. That contract will also prevent you from going and shopping around, so to say. And transfer prospects can also sign one of these offers as well, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that that'll be after the initial period of competition or enrollment. I'm assuming they'll tie it into enrollment somehow. Has passed, and then there'll be an eligibility to jump into the portal and then kind of continue the free-for-all of transfer that we kind of have now. Yeah, and there's a quote here from a Sports Illustrated article that I was reading. So basically, this new move aims to simplify the recruiting process and adapt to the new landscape shaped by name, image, and likeness agreements. By eliminating the NLI, the NCAA strives to create more transparency in recruiting and make the process easier for athletes to navigate. So, I mean, hopefully that is what it does. For us, we're still going to have signing day. We're still going to have our big signing day extravaganza because these new moves won't start until, 2025? The early signing period in the summer of 2025 is when the new institutional agreement packages will be able to be signed.
Yeah, so that's what we know so far. What we don't know is everything else. But like, how will this change NIL deals? How are schools going to interact with athletes who want to go out on their own and strike NIL deals? And currently, schools cannot pay players directly, and players can still make money on their own image outside of that. But like, schools have been using sponsorships, endorsements, donor collectives, other businesses to help those athletes get those deals. But this could also this could change the timing and the structure of the signing periods. It could potentially affect the high school recruiting process, mostly on like the bigger scale. But
Yeah, and we still have a number of updates that are still going to be coming down the line from the settlement process, which has not been finalized yet. I do believe there are a couple of deadline periods remaining in 2024 that will be coming up in December for certain processes. I believe there are some opt-in deadlines as well as some clarification deadlines for certain processes. And then we won't have the final approval hearing for this until April 2025. So realistically, the final pieces of this puzzle aren't going to be getting put together until relatively close to that new signing period, which I do believe will be in August of 2025.
Yeah, and I think that waiting time is kind of leading to some speculation, a little like, what's going to happen? How is this going to change things? And that's kind of what we're going to touch on next.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of questions.
Yeah. So the mechanism, we've been talking about a little bit of the mechanisms right now, but there are some dollar amounts that need to start getting familiarized with people's minds. And the big one is that the trio of settlements that the NCAA and the plaintiffs from those settlements agreed on has resulted in a $2.8 billion settlement being issued that will effectively be a payment of damages to past student athletes going back to 2016 through the present enrollment periods that student athletes are engaged in. And that will be coming from NCAA member institutions as well as the NCAA themselves, if I'm not mistaken. And then also there is now going to be a pool of funds that each institution will be eligible to allocate to student athletes on an annual basis. And we can equate it to kind of like a salary cap from football. From football, from basketball, from hockey, not baseball because they don't have a salary cap. They just pay a luxury tax. So that money's in 2025, for the 25-26 academic year, will be roughly $23 million per school. And those institutions will have the option of how they'll be allocating that to their individuals within their athletic department. And that number comes from that $23 million figure is roughly 22% of the monies the average power conference school makes from media rights, ticket sales, and sponsorships. So those are some of the numbers that are being tossed around right now. And you kind of mentioned it before, Jim, but there's an undercurrent to all of this that has started to crop up over the last few weeks, and some conversations that have been gaining traction and getting pretty loud in the social media space. And I would imagine amongst athletic department members, coaches, athletic directors, and stuff like that seem to be holding a bit of concern for quite a bit of the collegiate community.
Yeah, well, we have like two different there's two different thoughts here. So we had that quote by Gino Auriemma from UConn about, I mean, you can kind of touch on it more than I can, but his whole thing is like, just make it semi-professional.
Sure. Do you want me to?
If you want to get into it.
I can read the quote. So Coach Auriemma had a press conference earlier in the week. Many of you may have seen it, but for those of you who haven't, and for those of you who don't know, Gino Auriemma is the head women's basketball coach at the University of Connecticut, one of the most successful basketball programs, men's or women's, in the country. A number of current WNBA players have come from his program, and so he has been at the forefront of this as one of the leaders in NCAA athletics. And his quote earlier in the week, when asked about the current state of amateurism, transfer portal, and all of the NLI, NIL situations going on, had this to say, kind of at a view from 5,000 feet, but it does certainly, I think, press a lot of the buttons that folks have been asking about and kind of discussing on their own. And he said, I think it's a test. It's a test for if people are full of expletive or if they're serious. Do we keep the charade of student athlete amateurism, or do we call it what it is? Semi-professional, pay-for-play sports. Teams wouldn't be going 3,000 miles to play conference games if it had anything to do with student athlete welfare. So we obviously threw that in the garbage can. So let's just call it what it is. Let's make it a business and figure out, how do we manage this business? Other sports have done it. Sign kids to contracts and you're bound to your contract, and let's honor the terms of your contract. The portal, how about we teach kids to make a commitment and stick to it? How many times do you get to leave? No penalties. Let's sign kids to a contract and put a buyout in it. Let's have a salary cap. They're getting close, but they have to start calling it what it is and not be ashamed of it.
So to me, that's I don't want to say it's easy for him to say because he's part of a highly successful program that's always at the top. But it is. It's easy to say, like, why not just make it professional sports? Because you're a revenue generating sport. You're the best at what you do. And your program is going to make money, quote unquote, no matter what. But the juxtaposition comes from those sports that aren't revenue generating. That if you were to do this, if you were to follow through on this idea of basically making it semi-professional sports, they're not making any money, and they may not even exist anymore.
No, and to add on to that, it's the revenue generating sports that are at many institutions across divisional levels, but certainly at the NCAA Division I level, that do rely on the contributions of primarily the football and basketball programs to offset their operating costs. So a lot of institutions like to point to the fact that their Olympic sports generate revenue, and they do, but there's a net and a gross difference here. And so we see a lot of figures all the time about certain volleyball programs that bring in X number of millions of dollars, and that's a wonderful thing, but that's not just media, tickets, sponsorships. A lot of that has to do with fundraising, and that has to do with camps, and that has to do with other revenue streams that effectively just go to allow the program to operate, allow them to get gear, travel, and do all of the things that they do, and give the student athletes the experience that they have been promised or hope to achieve. And so there is a little bit of the idea that while money is coming in, it's not to the same degree as multi-million-dollar revenue deals that come from TV and sponsorships for things like basketball and football, which, if we just strip away all of the pretense to this, they are the main drivers of all of this action. These checks are being written on it's the best way to say this. With those varsity programs mostly in mind at this point. And they are the drivers of all this action, and it'll open up the doors for everybody else.
Yeah, I think there's a little like trickle down process there. Like, you know which programs are going to bring in revenue, and you know which programs are also going to cost you the most.
Yeah.
And basketball and football are almost in every situation the biggest revenue driving programs. And I think people don't want to look behind the curtain sometimes and say, like, well, like, for instance, Purdue, according to one of these awesome websites that I found, Purdue women's volleyball, I got to find the number here. They generated over $6 million in revenue last year. But how much of that revenue is actual revenue, not taking into consideration the cost to run the program for a season, salaries for coaches, equipment? Like, everything has its cost, and I don't think people really understand how much it costs to run a program. Our coaching college, I believe, kind of gave us a general number of what it costs to run one collegiate program. Even in Division III, it was about $1 million operating cost a year. So D3 is a minimum of $1 million, let's say.
for a state school too.
for a state school.
That's not a private school whose tuition is $70,000 a year.
Yeah. So what does that say about programs at the Division I level? Because everything is bigger. It's more expensive. There's more travel. Like there's different equipment, different costs, higher salaries for coaching staff.
More people on staff, more people in support roles.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say there is a big disparity between saying that let's just make them semi-professional leagues and everybody gets paid, because that's only going to apply to basically 2 sports.
It does seem that way at the outset. And to take that a step further, I think there have been a number of conversations that have been circulating through the collegiate ranks, certainly as we climb the level of influence within athletic departments. Coaches have been voicing concern for those Olympic sports that are non-net generating, I think we can call it, because they do bring in revenue, but maybe they don't net as much as they need to operate. And those voices are starting to come out and become pretty loud. And I think the concerns, and we don't want to sound like Chicken Little and the sky's falling here, but there have been conversations that have been tossed around by power conference athletic directors that seem to suggest that there may very well be trims and cutbacks from departments around the league in a response to the necessity to pay. I think the primary focus of this is the back damages from that $2 billion settlement, but also, the 20 million plus a year that is going to be used to pay these athletes will have ripple effects. And I think the voices are starting to come out and indicate as much, throughout the country.
Yeah, and I think the first step we saw from that is them putting the roster cap on a little bit. So now for most sports, there's going to be, is it all sports or most sports? Is it going to be a roster cap?
All, from what I understand.
Okay. So, I mean, that's one way.
The cap looks different. Yeah, but then they're capping it, but now the ability for there to be institutional agreements or scholarship aid agreements or whatever they're going to end up calling it has been removed. So everybody on that roster can be receiving benefit. So sure, you can't have a roster of 25 anymore, but all 18 of your kids are now getting money. So they're going to be spending more.
Yeah, which
presumably.
That's like,
presumably.
I don't know if they're trying to cut down on like what we talked, like operating costs, but then you're going to throw that right back in with scholarships. It's very confusing.
Well, and then we also have the NIL component of all this, where individuals are going to be signing institutional agreements for aid. They're going to have their own NIL deals that they'll be coming in with independently of whatever goes on there. And then there will be additional NIL opportunities that the institution can facilitate. So those they obviously are going to be coming from different pools and different segments, and those monies will be coming from other places. But I am curious to see what it's going to be like for athletes who go to some of these power conferences that have deep donor pockets, huge NIL pools, and how that impacts decision making, kids staying, and what athletic departments are going to be able to do and how they're going to be able to navigate balancing their budget. Because there have been a number of athletic directors in power conferences that have already come out and kind of tipped their hand as to where a lot of this is going to be coming from. And I have a quote here that was released, I believe, early last week from the University of West Virginia athletic director, Ren Baker, who said, among other aspects of The House versus NCAA proposed settlements are back damage payments to former student athletes and caps on roster sizes of teams with unlimited scholarships up to that number. We are deep into our planning with a goal of maintaining our current 18 varsity sports. We have not yet finalized, or what we have not yet finalized is the ongoing level of support we will be able to offer each program. And that's a really legalese way of saying there's a really good chance that we're not going to, and that this is going to end up being a situation where programs have to fundraise their existence.
Yeah, and it's a little bit alarmist to see, like athletic directors, coaches voicing that concern, and you'd hope that doesn't become the case. But as we've seen with the pandemic, when you're not operating at full, you're going to have to cut costs, and it looks like the first cost that they want to cut is those Olympic non-revenue generating sports. It's a little scary to think about because volleyball is one of those sports in most scenarios.
It's one of the more popular. It's certainly, as we've seen with some of the statistics that have come out over the years, volleyball does have the capacity to draw interest, bring crowds in, and generate revenue. What that looks like for each program's bottom line and how that's going to, and we have to remember that is just operational cost. That is literally what it costs to pay your coaches, pay your support staff, pay the athletic trainers, pay any, and here's the thing. I hate to, kind of reveal how the sausage is made for a lot of these programs, but a lot of these head coaches, they're not running the X's and O's of their programs because they have to go out and they have to fundraise $100,000 a year. And if you think that that's an unusual thing, or if you think that that's limited to just a few smaller programs that aren't you are dead wrong. There are programs that I know for a fact in the ACC that have to recruit donors and bring in nearly $100,000 a year. I'm not going to name names.
No, I don't even think you need to. It's very common that
but
they
it's
have to
it's not
raise funds.
yeah, and it's not uncommon at all. And if you go outside of the power conferences in Division I, it's extremely common. It is extremely common. For one of my jobs, one of my coaching positions at the NCAA Division I level, we had to fundraise half of my salary. Half of my salary. And insurance wasn't on that. So for everyone who's out there thinking that all of, there's just this vast sea and ocean of monies out there that the NCAA or that these institutions have, they don't. And if they do, that money isn't going to the non-revenue generating sports. And outside of the power conferences, it's a much more drastic situation. So when we have, comments like that coming from, West Virginia, and then we had, an article that came out recently that had some of the, this was in I believe the Orlando Sentinel from earlier in the year. A couple of the universities in Florida, their athletic programs and their directors had some thoughts on the matter as well. The University of Florida athletic director, Scott Strickland, said that that money to pay players is not currently available. He said bluntly, something would have to give, whether it's fewer people on staff, fewer services for our student athletes, or what we don't want to have happen, but what some people envision, having fewer sports. Central Florida Athletic Director Terry Mohair said, I'm very concerned about the collateral damage to the Olympic sports if there's a new revenue model in college athletics. I worry when we have to start making triage decisions on cost. I hope we can figure this out without eliminating sports and educational opportunities. And that was in March. So the conversation, so let's get a couple of things straight right out of the gate. We're not talking about ideas that are novel, because if we look back to the situations that happened during COVID, when football and basketball couldn't operate, we saw men's volleyball programs get the axe. We saw Gymnastics programs, get the axe. Sailing, tennis, and a number of other sports were wiped off the books. And now some of them have come back. However, the ripple effect of that shockwave that went through NCAA athletics is now cycling back. And I would be shocked if we didn't see it in some capacity in the coming years.
Yeah, I like that could even have an impact on our Olympic teams, because they are Olympic sports that are the ones that are being considered the most to maybe be cut or temporarily cut. That may have a negative impact on our Olympic success in those programs. There is that effect.
Oh, like the trickle down through it could. I don't know. I think the top talent is still going to find their way into the programs that still exist, and they're going to find their training opportunities. I don't think the talent's going to not, go anywhere, but
you never know. Long term, you just never know.
Maybe I think that's probably a little farther down the line, but I think the clear and present danger right now is that the conversations are being had that puts the Olympic sports squarely in the crosshairs of another set of budgetary decision-making that doesn't seem to be moving in a favorable direction for those programs.
Yeah, and I think the most unfortunate part of that is a lot of those athletes that participate in those programs that are on scholarship in those programs, like that may be the only way they had the opportunity to go to school.
It could be.
And now it might be pulled out from under them because they want to pay basketball and football play, or they have to, really. And they got to pay back a bunch of other athletes that are already done with their careers.
It's true. And, and let's face it, I'm going to be making some generalizations here, but it's the Olympic sport athletes are the ones that are going for the well-rounded collegiate experience where they're a student athlete, a real student athlete, and they're going to get a degree and they're going to leave. The one and done basketball athletes who, come on campus in the summer of their freshman year and then they train, maybe they go to class. We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. They're only going to be there for a year, and then they're going to the draft. And the only reason that they're at the college is to be able to fulfill the requirement that the NBA has to be a 1-year college athlete, or I think they can
1 year out of high school, so they can go play in like Australia, Europe.
Right, which I do think we're going to see more specifically basketball players do, because maybe less now that there's an opportunity and an avenue to be paid, because that was the whole thing. It's like, why am I going to go risk my professional career to play 1 year in college? And then if I get hurt, that's going to impact my ability to earn down the line. So we may see a tweak to that, but for those athletes that were coming in and they were going to be gone by January anyway, or, March, it doesn't really affect them at all. And if anything, that's part of the larger issue at hand, is that the whole idea of amateurs. I mean, Coach Oriema alluded to it in the clip that, in the interview clip that he had that we read earlier. It's not amateurism anymore for those sports, but it largely will be for the most of everybody else. So so where's the line of demarcation with regard to how we're treating basketball and football versus everything else?
That's the big question. Well, one of the many big questions.
There's a lot of questions still to come with this, and we're going to have a lot of answers that unfold throughout the coming weeks and months. But right now, I don't want to say it's doom and gloom, because I don't want to speculate to that degree, but there are some shockwaves moving through the space that will have some pretty dramatic impacts on a lot of folks. And it's not just the athletes, because if the programs get cut, that's coaches gone, that's support staff gone, and there are greater ramifications than just the athletic opportunities for the athletes here, which obviously is the main focal point right now. But
yeah, and you'd hope there'd be a balance there. Like if you're at a school where your basketball and football programs are highly successful, and maybe you're on the volleyball team there, you'd hope that you wouldn't be impacted that much. But we don't know. And it drives me crazy because like we're fully invested in this sport. We talk about it at every level, and we just don't know how, like we've seen already seen some impact by this with the amount of players that have decommitted and committed elsewhere. And that potentially could have been because of this roster cap.
Oh, I know for a fact that there are a couple of those that we've seen over the last just 2-3 weeks that have had the rug pulled out from under them from their commitments because of this roster cap of 18.
Yeah, and I guess the silver lining for this would be that as long as they find another opportunity, that's another program that's getting a talented player. So there may be more parity. There's a little bit more talent moving around rather than the usual suspects of big name schools. But it's got to be concerning when you commit somewhere, you're not going to be on a scholarship, and they go, oh, unfortunately, we can only have 18 players. You're the next one up. That's got to go.
Well, I would take it a step farther even and say that this is the other side of the coin that Coach Auriemma mentioned in his quote, where he's like, in regards to the transfer portal, why don't we? I think his sentiment was we need to teach kids to honor commitments and stick to commitments. Well,
goes both ways.
100%. There needs to be an institutional commitment to them too. And in the past there has, and I think we got to a point before we got to all of the, the settlement stuff where, at least in my experience, there were a number of situations where from the institutional side, we had to honor all of our commitments to the letter, to the T, but the student athlete could opt out and bail anytime they wanted. And I think that's kind of where we may end up seeing a little bit more of a leveling of the playing field in terms of with these institutional agreements where it's like, we're going to hold up our end of the bargain for however long we've signed this contract for as far as the institution is concerned. So that means that like if it's a 2-year deal, you're here for 2 years. After that, you can go and jump in the portal if you want to, or we sign another agreement.
Right.
Or extended or whatever. I really feel like we're starting to, this conversation really is starting to sound more like free agent negotiation.
Yeah. Contract extensions, new contract negotiations.
Yeah.
It's just weird to me though, because like if and when it gets to that point where you're treating college athletes like professional athletes and negotiating contracts, what happened to school? The academic part of it,
I mean, these agreements could certainly have academic performance tied to them, depending on the sport. I know that for many Olympic sports at the NCAA Division I level, coaches and administrators do have a certain threshold of academic performance that their teams need to meet in order to stay within a certain, I guess, standing within the athletic department. And that can, that certainly may be something that comes to fruition. The NCAA and I should say the AVCA kind of have a nice relationship with the academic All-American award that they put out and honoring the team award that goes out to teams that average I want to say it's a 3 something. I think it's a 3.5. I think they have a couple tiers of it. Anyway, a lot of volleyball programs specifically do put a bit of a feather in their cap for that team academic award because like I said, there's an individual one, but there's also one that's for the team. And so I wonder, to your point, what degree the academic component of this will be for specifically the Olympic sports, because I think I think we're past the point that we can drop the pretense on basketball and football. Those athletes are there to compete and generate revenue for the school. There are some that will pursue their academic interests, but quite a few of them, I wouldn't say the majority, but a number, the high profile, they're looking as a stepping stone into a professional career. And that's fine. But to Coach Auriemma's point, let's just call it what it is.
Yeah, gone are the days of, hey, we'll give you free tuition if you come play sports for us.
Well, those days went by the wayside when the colleges were signing, multi-$100 million TV deals and signing multi-million-dollar sponsorship deals with food manufacturers and local businesses and things like that. And all of a sudden these kids are looking around like, okay, but we're the ones putting on the show. And that's go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just agreeing with you. It's they don't come to see them, they come to see the athletes.
And it's an oddly symbiotic relationship because the athletes come for the institution comes for the athletes, and the fans come for both. And what everyone in this conversation needs to understand just plainly is that collegiate athletics is the entertainment branch of these institutions.
Yeah, basically.
I mean,
what else would it be for?
What else? Okay, let's put it this way. What other components of any college are being paid hundreds of millions of dollars on an annual basis to televise their activities? Is the biology department getting $100 million contract from CBS?
So I was just going to bring that up. Like, they may not be on show, but I feel like a lot of these places that have like amazing research labs, great programs, like that would be the next closest thing. But that's almost purely based on your academic ability.
Precisely.
It's like polar opposites.
Hey, listen, would I love to see the organic chemistry labs at Stanford being more highly recognized for their work and the improvements and the advancements they're making to society? Sure. I just assume you guys have a really good OChem department. So if it's mid, I'm sorry to anybody that I left off, but I'm sure it's pretty good. I think we'd love to see that. But guess what? Are you going to pack a stadium with 80,000 people to watch a dissolution? No.
To watch science.
Listen, again, we're trying to just live in the reality of where we are and what's happening now. And for better or worse, this is where we are. And so we kind of we have to roll with it, at least from where we are, but I think the trickle down to the juniors ranks, certainly for volleyball, and as you younger athletes are beginning your recruiting processes, or if you're in the middle of them and you're trying to figure all this out, if you're in a power conference situation, it may not be a bad idea to start looking at representation for yourself, certainly for your name, image, and likeness. If you're not planning on being in a Division I space, it's not going to affect you in any capacity at this point. It may down the road, but in the next 4 years, I wouldn't bank on it.
No, I'd agree. I
don't see the Division III level getting to this point.
No, I don't think so. I don't really think I could see how it could.
Division II might, because there's still some institutional revenue generating there, but to a much lesser degree.
Yeah, I think right now, I think Division II sticking with the national letter of intent, and still having scholarships. It's kind of like the perfect balance almost, because now those athletes still get to use their name, image, and likeness, and they can go out and make some money for themselves. But at the same time, they're still getting a scholarship to go to school, and it's not anything crazy like it is at the Division I level.
Yeah.
It's like that in between.
Yeah. And I mean, to Coach Oriema's point about, calling it what it is, and it's semi-professional pay for play. I do think that the idea of amateurism is still going to have a place in collegiate athletics. It's just where that will manifest itself. And it's not going to be in the power conferences. It may be in some of the more academically minded mid-majors, right? Like your Patriot Leagues, things like that, your Ivy Leagues, places like that. And then as we come down into Division II and Division III, but it's, if you're going to look for that from the SEC, if you're going to look for that from the Big 12, from the Pac, whatever the Pac is going to end up being, And speaking of the Pac-12, whatever their thing is, just got a $50 million agreement on NIL pool money. Another one. Casual.
Good for them.
I guess there's like 4 schools in that conference right now, so I don't know. Although there are a couple coming in 2026, they're going to start bolstering that up again, and I think they're in the evaluation process of who's going to be added. But I mean, just look at, I mean, the Pac-12, like their situation is actually like an amazing way to look at, like an amazing lens to look through all of this, because once called the Conference of Champions, in 2 years completely cratered out because of higher revenue earning opportunities in other conferences.
Yeah. And it's just crazy to think about. It really is.
We're in an interesting place. And I know I said we were going to say, I don't know. We don't know a lot more than we did today, but we're just speculating. We have to, all we can do is really speculate and read the tea leaves. But I think the leaves that we're reading are being dropped by influential members of the community and people who can kind of see down the path of where we're headed a little bit more than the average person may, who's not necessarily as plugged in.
Yeah, and they're realistic concerns.
Yeah, they are. And I think, again, part of that goes back to the experience that we had, 4 or 5 years ago now with everything happening with COVID and departments making much faster decisions to cut programs than is happening now. And part of that, I think, obviously a lot of that was reactionary. And again, we saw the reformation of a lot of those programs with more time to think about it, with more time to plan and strategize. I don't know. I think we're going to see a lot of things happen all at once. Once the money starts flowing, once the damage payments start to come out, once the contracts for players start getting signed, I think we're going to see these departments start to make some of the hard choices.
I was going to say difficult choices,
which they call them hard choices for them to make, but other people have to live those choices, because the people that are making the decisions, the athletic directors, they're not getting cut. Board of directors, they're not getting cut. Football, basketball salaries, coaches, staffs, they're not getting cut. You have to pay the players. And that pool, the power conference teams and schools, they have to operate at the top of whatever that cap is to stay competitive. So where's the money going to come from? And it's going to come from the X number of Olympic sports that these institutions sponsor, which a lot of them, as we mentioned before, and maybe we didn't, but a lot of these programs do operate under the benefit of football and basketball programs' revenue generating activities, their TV deals, their travel deals. When I was at St. Francis University for the 2 years that I was there, our football team was ranked respectfully at the very bottom of the NCAA Division I ranks. They got paid 6 figures to go to other schools to play them to get beat up. And that money, some of it stayed within the football program, and a lot of it would go to help support the other sports. And so if folks don't understand that, if you don't understand why that functions that way, it's pretty simple. It's because these schools sign multi-million-dollar media deals, sponsorship deals, and the like, and then they get to use that to bolster their programs. And then some of that goes to other schools to bring them in and play them and compete. And then those schools take that money back, and it all trickles down from the haves to the trying, and you can call it the have-nots if you want. But that's a very real component of all of this, that a lot of people are like, well, why don't you just not have football? Why don't you just not have basketball? Well, then you don't have anything. Why don't we make trims and cuts to football and basketball? Because then you have even less. And I hate to say it, but that's just the landscape and the nature of where we are now. So for all of the bitter biscuits that we hear about, football and basketball just being there to generate revenue, it's like, yeah, well, to a large degree they are. And again, they're the entertainment arm of these institutions that goes to support, literally, not figuratively, literally thousands of other people's experience, their jobs, their security for them and their families. So as much as there's probably a lot of people that are frustrated with the situation and how it may impact the Olympic sports, we need to understand that there is, within the current landscape of collegiate athletics, a relationship that exists between and amongst all of these teams and programs. And if you love a team, if you love a program that you participated for or that you follow closely, you need to start looking into the ways that you as an individual can start supporting them too. Otherwise, they will be likely on the way out.
Just like the NLI.
I hate to sound like Chicken Little and the sky is falling, but we're reading some pretty clear indications, and we're getting some seismic tremors that are going to be resulting in bigger shifts coming down the line.
Yeah, and I feel like if we didn't address this in a realistic way, in a cautious way, we wouldn't be doing our job. Like, volleyball is one of the sports that may be impacted by this whole new landscape of college athletics.
Outside of the power conferences, I would almost guarantee it.
Yeah. So, what? I don't know.
And even at some power conferences, it may come into jeopardy.
So support your local volleyball team.
And there was one point that we still haven't talked about that is a component in all of this, but how Title IX plays a role in all of this is still unclear.
Yeah, that was like the hardest thing for me to try and think about, was how is Title IX going to play into this if the foreshadowing comes to fruition, which is that they'll be cutting Olympic programs. But how are you going to do that when you have to maintain a certain number of athletes within Title IX?
Yeah.
How is that going to happen? How?
Well, we'll definitely be seeing men's programs get cut to maintain the ratio that exists that has to be in place for, Title IX considerations, to be compliant with that. So again, same, I would look back to what happened during COVID, and you look to the programs that got cut. It was men's volleyball, men's tennis, sailing, gymnastics, things like that. It's remains to be seen, but we've had a pretty clear outline of where the interest for all of this has been derived from and where it will be going. And then a line in the sand of, okay, this is who this facilitates, and this is who will be operating in the wake of those decisions.
Yeah.
And a lot remains to be seen. We have a couple important dates coming up in December, just for some deadlines and stuff, like we said before. And then, the rubber will really start hitting the road in early 2025.
We'll see how it goes.
We will indeed.
All that to say, goodbye, NLI.
Yeah, it's been a real treat. Not really.
The future is going to be wild.
It will be. And here's the thing is, today's conversation certainly has been a little bit of foreshadowing. It has been a little bit of maybe some dark clouds on the horizon, but that's not to say that there aren't good times ahead, and there aren't really important things to be celebrating. Chiefly being, we have a pathway for student athletes in the volleyball space to be compensated for their efforts and what they bring to the institutions that they represent. And I do think that from an overall perspective, that is a good thing. We just need more of the path ahead of us illuminated. before we can really start getting excited, because for progress to occur, oftentimes there does have to be some sort of a trim or a culling, if you will. You don't get the apple from the tree without cutting off some branches. And unfortunately, it does seem as though there may be some branches being trimmed here in the near future, or at least have the potential to be trimmed. We'll see.
Yes, we will.
We will see. But we're thankful for the people that occupy the space as coaches, as administrators, as supporters of programs. And we are very thankful for the environment that we get to operate in, even if the waters are a little murky at the present time.
Yeah, we're never going to stop growing the game.
Have to.
All right, everybody.
Is that about it for today?
Yes, sir. You want to sign us off, Sam?
I will. In these times of unease and
When I find
unsureness,
myself in times of trouble, Mother Sammy calls to me.
be good to everybody.